So Dan had to step away for a second, and he's digital identity and securing critical projects. We'll have to wait a minute, especially if Kim's not able to make it. And then, do we have somebody here for tooling? Looking through the names here. No, not yet.
All right, sorry, I just had to quiet some stuff down around since I assume I'm going to be talking for a while today.
Yeah, I was just saying that we'll have to wait for you to get back since I think you're up for the first two, and I'm not sure we have anyone here from tooling yet. So,
All right, yeah, sorry about that.
no worries. So with that, you want to kick it off, Dan?
Sure. Should I take over the screen share?
Oh yeah, if you want to. Yeah.
Let me see.
I'll stop.
I'm just going to go through the repos.
Yeah, it's all yours.
Dan, which one are you doing first? Digital identity?
That's the one I started with. Is that correct?
That's great.
Does it matter?
No, but I'm trying to type in notes as we go.
Oh, sure. Right. Can we see now? Sorry, I just got the screen share set up.
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. All right, so here is the repo and the README here. This is the Digital Identity Attestation Working Group. When we first started, it was called the Developer Identity Working Group, but it was named. We did a poll and got a bunch of community feedback. There were a bunch of options. This is it's kind of wordy, but this is the one that I think best captured what the group was intending to focus on. Ways for developers and systems and tools and anything involved in a supply chain that has an identity to attest to that identity in ways like that. We've been mostly focused in this group on exploring and researching and identifying problems in this area, which concretely means that every single week so far, we've had really awesome presentations from like pretty much experts in the field or people that are trying to secure their open source supply chains for their projects. I think we started with Constantine, who runs the security and signing and build systems for kernel.org and the Linux kernel releases, talking about how they do it. We've had other people from completely different projects like Node.js, where they have a couple dozen maintainers that can all do releases. It's a very different trust model from the Linux kernel where there are 2 people that can do releases that are very well known, all the way out to what other presentations have we had? Do you remember, David? No, I'm blanking. Kim wrote an awesome blog post that linked to all the presentations and videos, though, up on YouTube.
Yeah, that's an awesome blog post. We probably ought to put the link here because it really gives a nice summary of the information that's been shared.
Yeah, I've spent a ton of time trying to research this stuff too, and I think that actually those videos are probably one of the best resources in the world on all of the different problems and solutions people have come up with here. Everybody does things very differently. There is no standard practice for how you sign your release artifacts that we found. The tooling varies greatly. The trust models vary greatly. There's some common themes, like everybody seems to be using PGP because they can't find much else, but nobody is using Web of Trust, stuff like that we've kind of found. Then there's the kind of human elements on top of it. Oh yeah, we had presentations from the Debian maintainers here who have some really interesting and well thought through solutions for the human elements where Debian maintainers today, I guess before 2020 started, Debian maintainers had a very strict and difficult and cumbersome process to become onboarded and have release permissions in Debian. You had to meet 3 other Debian maintainers and have them sign your key in person, and they would look at your government identification and verify that it matched who you are. That obviously didn't work for 2020, where nobody could meet each other in person. So I started relaxing it and allowing things like videos, people to do that over video and webcams, as well as some systems to start moving to allow more pseudonymous, I don't know how to pronounce that word, pseudonymous contributions, where people can establish a reputation over time without a real name, and by signing work repeatedly with the same key over a period of months, and have people vouching for your identity. was pretty interesting. What else have we done? What other presentations have there been? I guess some research style stuff. People from NYU and Purdue University came and presented a bunch of supply chain integrity research in the update framework and in Toto projects. Yeah, I guess we should just find a link to that blog post. I don't. Let's find it. It's on the OpenSSF blog. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff.
Yeah, just go ahead. I will find it and link to it.
Yeah, I found it here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Linux kernel in Toto. Oh yeah, self-sovereign. I keep forgetting that one. This is a very new, very exciting area where people can do zero knowledge proofs and establish the parts of their identity they need to in a verifiable way without exposing parts of their identity they don't need to. It's based on a bunch of the work in Hyperledger and the different blockchain research efforts. This was an awesome presentation from Arnaud, who chairs the Hyperledger project as part of the LF. This Git one is really cool too, and we're pursuing actually trying to get this work finished. Git, similar to the way Git integrates SHA-1 today inside of Git, it's very hard-coded, very wide-reaching throughout the code base. They've spent a couple years trying to refactor it to allow SHA-256 and other hash algorithms. There's been a bunch of work to reduce the coupling of Git to GPG tooling for signing. I mean, one of the cool ideas here is that you can actually perform digital signatures with SSH keys in the SSH toolset. Very few people on GitHub and in the open source world have long-term GPG keys they maintain. Way more people have SSH keys that they use because you kind of need it to publish to GitHub at all. And so this is some work to allow people to actually start signing Git commits. Step one is to allow people to sign Git commits with something that's not GPG. And then step two would be to allow signing with your SSH keys that you already have. And people do a pretty good job securing with UE keys and hardware and stuff like that. That was pretty interesting. We're actually pursuing finishing that work now over the next couple of months. Did I miss anything, David? I know you've been in almost all of these meetings.
Let's see here. I guess SIGStore is another thing that.
Oh yeah, that was the latest one, the latest presentation.
Right. That's probably worth mentioning because I don't think is that in the blog post. I don't think it was in the blog post.
No, it didn't make it because the blog post was like January,
later.
February.
Yeah,
we'll have to
so
do
probably
another
worth
one
mentioning that one.
Yeah, we'll have to do another one of those blog posts after the next set. Yeah, a week ago, Luke Hans and I presented some work we've been doing also in the Linux Foundation called SIGStore, which is a bunch of different technologies we're putting together to try to address a lot of these problems. Things like transparency logs, certificate authorities, that kind of stuff. It's been pretty exciting too. And I'm sure there's others that we missed in the last couple after the blog post came out. But yeah, I guess the main work product so far in this group, it's kind of non-traditional. I guess it's publishing this background catalog of all of the prior art and efforts in this space. And personally, I found it really valuable to see. Any questions about this one?
So I definitely agree. These presentations have been awesome. I was just kind of wondering, like, cataloging all this is really cool. Like, what are sort of the next, I guess, more tangible steps? Like, are we looking to try to adopt or get behind one of these initiatives to try to drive it forward, or kind of like what's sort of the long-term vision look like there?
Yeah, I think the idea early on was that we wanted to do some, research, figure out what people were doing, and start to distill some best practices from that. And then the more we dug, the more we realized that nobody seems to be at a point where we can actually start to do that yet. Every project is doing things completely differently, stuff like that. So I think that is the goal. We do want to start to publish some best practices and distill out the patterns and tell people what they should be doing where we can. But I think we're still a little ways away from that. There is no good set of best practices so far, only things that other people have tried that all have their own sets of shortcomings.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, like, do we think that some of them, like, I know a couple of the ones like that you mentioned were really, really fascinating, like I forget what it's called, the self identity, or where you farm out the pieces of it. was really interesting. But do we think like some of those are more further along that we might want to like help push, or just kind of still in that wait and see sort of step?
I don't think that I've been convinced, I guess, enough by any of them to really say that they solve everything. I think the blog post is kind of the best we've been able to do so far, which is just explain what people have done, what the pros and cons of that are, and provide that and let people make their own decision. I definitely don't feel like we can actually like make any general recommendations yet of you should do this for your project under all circumstances. If you're a project like the Linux kernel, then the model that the Linux kernel people put together is pretty good. Unsurprisingly, they've spent a lot of time and thought and energy on it. But if you're a different project that has a different contribution model, then maybe some of these other ones are more appropriate. You see, yeah, in the end, I could see this as like a choose your own adventure thing, but right now the branches are all still, there's way too many of them to make that useful.
Yeah, that's great.
I hope you don't mind me asking, Dan, don't mean to put you on the spot, but this conversation leads me to think maybe what might be helpful would be a white paper of at least, here are the various things, here are the various approaches all in one place. You can pick this thing up and at least see what people are doing. The blog post is actually pretty close to that. It's just not something we're actively updating, but we could.
Yeah, we kicked around the white paper idea. There's probably an issue somewhere here actually tracking it. I think that would be a great deliverable we could do, because the videos are really useful and there's good question and answer, but it is not as digestible as something written down. Would definitely be supportive of helping out with that. The videos have actually been kind of fun given the whole pandemic situation. It's almost been like a long-running conference series is kind of how I've thought of it. Instead of having all these talks in one day, we kind of get another like an expert talk every 2 weeks that we get to kind of plan and schedule and invite people to do as we learn. I don't think I ever would have imagined a model like this working pre-isolation, work from home for a year. Anything else here?
Thinking about the criteria that we set for showing that a group is active.
Right.
We had there's a certain number of contributors that regularly show up to form that community. Do you feel like you've got a core group that regularly shows up?
Yes. The average attendance is probably somewhere between 10 and 20, I would say. And yeah, there's definitely a core group of probably 5 to 10 that are there for at least 2/3 or 3/4 of the meetings.
Great.
Yeah, I've definitely seen good turnout in that meeting. Like I said, if folks haven't been in that one, definitely check it out, because those talks are really interesting.
And if you have suggestions for more talks, let us know.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. We get to just invite people, and they've been super kind and receptive and really generous with their time.
Yeah, I really liked how the variety of all the different talks, yet they're all related, right? But then they're all so different, which I guess is part of the challenge too.
Anything
Any other
else?
questions for Dan? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I found this helpful. This is probably the hardest working group for me to describe when people ask, what's going on at OpenSSF, or what do you do? Like, well, there's these 6 working groups, and I don't know exactly how to describe this one.
Yeah, it's not what I predicted early on either. The space is way more of a mess and broader and deeper than I think I imagined when we started. I thought there'd be some best practices we could figure out pretty quickly and start recommending and building tools to make them easier, but we're definitely not at that spot.
Every time I've been involved in some sort of identity discussion or working group, it seems like it always kind of tries to walk back to first principles. And like the very notion of an identity is an impossible thing to define.
Yeah, I don't think we're even at that point yet. There's just basic gaps like tooling and everything. If you read all the posts from experts in cryptography and everything, they say stop using PGP, it's old, it's outdated, it's broken, and then they have a long list of replacements for every single use case in PGP except for digital signing, and they say there's got to be something, and there really isn't. There's like the SSH keygen tool can kind of do it. There's not a lot else out there. You can do OpenSSL if you feel like remembering all of those commands, but it's, yeah, even before you get back to what an identity is, the tooling to generate and manage and distribute signatures is a huge gap today.
Yeah, not to take us on a tangent, but even around vulnerability disclosure, we have the exact same thing where it's like people are still largely relying on PGP to like send an encrypted bug report or whatever. And it's pretty wild that it's 2021 and we don't have like something that we can all rely on that we're comfortable with and that is like somewhat usable.
Yeah.
That is incredibly shocking. I share your sentiment there.
I don't know. I think it's pretty good. See what I did there?
Yeah, yeah, that was but
All right, next one then, or anything else? Do you want me to just keep going, or do we want to change and pace and switch to tooling for a bit?
do we have, I think, is it Ryan Ware's the lead, but I don't see him on the call. Do we have anybody else from tooling? I didn't get a confirmation from them either.
I've been to some of the tooling meetings, but I certainly can't present for them. I don't feel I should be presenting for them. I'm not ready for that anyway.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right then.
And
Oh,
see if
sorry, Dan, looks like it's your day today.
All right. Yeah, so the other working group that I've been involved in is the Securing Critical Projects working group. This one, the working group meetings have kind of been run in a similar fashion to the digital identity ones, where they're mostly presentations, except there's also a bunch of code and other projects that people have been working on. And I actually feel really bad because we keep trying to set aside time in these meetings to discuss, things going on in the projects, but we never seem to have time because the presentations go so well, and I never really want to cut them off. This one, it's a little bit different, the model, I guess. Most of the presentation requests are inbound rather than outbound. Like, we're not going and soliciting people. There's just a giant backlog of people asking to come and present here, which is kind of cool. But yeah, we've had groups like the Open Source Technology Innovation Fund, OSTIF, that does a bunch of grants and security auditing and funding like that, come and talk about how their models work. Josh asked from Let's Encrypt came to talk about their efforts to start rewriting things in memory safe languages like Rust. And I think they've actually gotten quite a few companies interested in contributing funding to these efforts from these presentations and stuff, which is pretty cool. We don't have a direct funding model set up through the OpenSSF yet, but it is nice to see that people are kind of still taking advantage of these forums and supporting projects in a more ad hoc fashion, kind of meeting each other in this meeting and using this almost as like a matchmaking service to some extent. I think this XKCD here, I don't remember when it came out. It was sometime after the group started, but we had to add it because it was perfect, so perfectly described the goals of this working group, to try to identify these, tiny little blocks supporting everything and then figure out ways to reinforce them. It's challenging. Both sides of that are challenging, I guess, identifying those pieces holding everything up. We've been working with and supporting the Linux Foundation's partnership with Harvard, their Laboratory for Innovation. I forget what it stands for, LISH, but they do a bunch of survey work every single year to ask people what they're using, ask developers what support they need and stuff like that. The one coming out now is called Census 2. I believe it started to come out last year, and they've been releasing more and more data throughout this spring. And they're currently working on scoping the next version of all of this. The projects that we have going on in here, there are a few. Switch back to their question. No, never mind. I just heard a ping and thought it was a question in chat. Sorry. Some of the other stuff, yeah, going on here. We've been writing code and using some donated, compute resources where we can to help some projects. A lot of this started with a really good blog post from a developer named Jordan Wright, who spun up a bunch of AWS VMs on his own credit card while he was between jobs to try to find malware on the Python package index, and he found a bunch of stuff. Wrote an awesome blog post. People got really excited, and then he had to turn it off because it was his personal credit card. And so we figured out some ways to get him long-running infrastructure and rerun that analysis and actually start scaling it up to other package managers to hopefully shorten the gap between an individual writes this code and runs it every 6 months and writes a blog post to we can actually start to catch this stuff on a more continual basis. So that one's been pretty fun. There have been a bunch of people from the community helping out and working on that infrastructure. We actually found a bunch of spam issues on PyPy with that, where people were uploading a whole bunch of SEO style spam, hundreds and hundreds of packages with links to malware and all sorts of other stuff like that, like advertising free Discord credits and stuff like that. So this project actually found something sort of malware-ish, and we had some pretty good blog posts and publicity from that. I think going forward, we want to start kind of separating the presentations and people asking for funding and stuff like that from the actual technical conversations. They've been more ad hoc just because, like I said, we never really have time in the meetings for them because the presentations go so well. So kind of coming up with some way to separate out the meetings between project updates and unblocking all of our contributors versus the awesome presentations on things that need help and funding for them. Other long-term stuff, we do hope to start using the OpenSSF as a direct fundraising vehicle once the governing board and TAC get that model more firmed up. But so in the meantime, it's a little bit of a holding pattern on that front, while also having companies and people that do have resources and stuff to contribute in a more ad hoc basis until that gets set up. Did I miss anything here? Any questions?
So once we get the funding model kind of all figured out, do you have an idea around like how we're going to identify what the critical projects are so that we could help support those? Or are we just going to wait for kind of community to ask about it?
Yeah, that one's kind of challenging. This has actually been pretty helpful because it's pointed out that that is not actually the hard part of the problem. I thought that was going to be the hard part too coming in, but there are way more critical projects out there. The problem is finding ones that can actually take and use funding, it turns out. So you can come up with lists however you want to and rank things and everything like that. But it's non-trivial on a lot of these projects to, if you have a check, no matter how many zeros you put on, actually turn that into results for that project. It takes months to find people, that have the expertise and don't already have some full-time job that prevents them from taking on side work like this. And negotiate those terms, get things set up, and then actually get them helping out on the project. One of the main things I think we kind of want to do, and I don't have a great answer for it, is find the ones that people would never think of. And those are the ones that usually don't have any maintainers. Those are things like the Core Infrastructure Initiative did this early on. Those are things like the example I like to use is NTPD. That project is maintained by a single person, had a ton of problems, and if you asked 100 people what services they run on their machines, I don't think anybody would have named NTPD. It's just something you never think about. So that's kind of the more important one in my head, rather than kind of coming up with some ranking or scoring or a list of critical projects. Is trying to come up with some techniques to make sure that we're not forgetting huge parts of the software stack that you don't think of on a daily basis. And then seeing what we can do there. Does that answer the question, I guess?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think it's an interesting idea, right? Because it kind of harks back to like that XKCD picture, where it's there's that little cube, right, that's holding it all together, but we don't think about it. And I think there's a lot of packages out there that are like that.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't come up with anything better than some kind of survey and asking people and really trying to prompt them with answers to think of the things that they wouldn't normally think of. And that's kind of what we're working with the Harvard group to do later this year.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Is the package feeds project underneath this working group?
Yeah, so the package feeds and the malware analysis were kind of the same thing, and they split up the repos a little bit because that one's actually more independently useful. The way it started was we were watching all packages uploaded to PyPy and then running some analysis on them to see if they were malicious. And then we wanted to add other package feeds to that, like NPM and Ruby. And they all have mechanisms to watch for new packages, but they're all slightly different. Some are polling, some are this PubSub stuff, some are RSS feeds where you have to check every couple of minutes to make sure you don't drop something. So the team decided to just unify all of that and make a standard format for watching all those package feeds to make that easy to do for the analysis stuff. It turned out that was useful to a bunch of other people who were trying to do things like typo squatting detection and other types of analysis other than just kind of the dynamic runtime malware stuff. So we split that off. It's just two separate GitHub repos with separate code, but they work together. It's just to make it easier to use just the feed of new packages and versions on repositories for things other than the malware analysis.
Cool. Thanks.
Stuff like if you don't actually want to install the thing or see what's inside of it, and then you can just watch that feed and do typo squatting stuff by comparing names. Bloomberg reached out recently because they're about to start a similar effort internally to set up a unified feed about all of this. So they're going to be contributing to that project too, rather than build their own. And I'd say attendance and stuff for this one is similar to the identity one. Some have way more, some have fewer in the meetings, and then there's a really active community of people contributing to the projects too. It's almost like there's two separate groups of people here. There's the ones talking about funding and then the ones working on tooling to help.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask. So one thing that came up in the vulnerability disclosures group, I think it was yesterday, was folks asking like, how is this thing going to operate once it is launched? And like, will you guys have a well-defined procedure? And I know that we're on track to have that. But there's this question of, do you need to come forward with a recommended funding body? And I think the answer to that is no, but some clarification around like, if you bring forward a proposal, do you need to know who will fund it, or will we do that matching and ultimately allocate those funds directly based just on proposal quality?
Yeah, I think that's a question, I guess, for the governing board and stuff as we start figuring out how to allocate funding. We don't actually get that many requests of people just coming in saying they need money for something. We get a lot of ideas, like people coming in saying, I think we should spend money on this space, or we think this would be a good area to invest. But then you have to do the work of finding out who's going to do that work, how you can actually go and turn that into like an operational model. Which isn't what I expected. I thought we'd get a whole bunch of people coming and saying, I need money to go fix my project, or I need this, I need that. It's pretty rare. Like we get a couple of them, but it's way more rare compared to everybody has a giant list of like, we should fix networking software, or we should invest in this, we should invest in that. It's like, great, that does make sense. I would love to. Who can we pay?
Yeah.
And then
who will take our money?
Exactly.
That's funny. Well, I think then maybe like when we think about these processes longer term, it might make sense to have a few different ways of coming into the group, but to formalize those so it's really clear to people like how to engage and what to expect from OpenSSF. So maybe we have like a well-defined proposal process that maybe has some like required fields or required information that people provide if they just want to say, give me money for this thing. But then maybe we also have some mechanism for raising like generic topics, even if you're not the one asking for the money, where people can like submit ideas, and maybe periodically the critical projects group or whatever can either look at those and like prioritize some and allocate funding, or we should figure out like, will we fund anything that comes in as a formal proposal ahead of some of those more abstract ideas, or is there going to be like this prioritization exercise of like, well, just because this one's a formal proposal doesn't mean we want to give it money ahead of this other thing that we think is way more important. These are little things that I guess, like based on what you're saying, it sounds like have arisen through defining this group that we might not have thought of in advance as something that we'd have to think about.
Yeah, I like the way you put having the required fields, because we really need 3 to fund something. It's like we need the name of the person or company we're going to give the money to, what they're going to do, and then how much money. And if you come with just 1 or 2 of those things, then there's a huge amount of work to find the other 1 or 2 missing fields. And trying to encourage people. If you only have a couple, then we can kind of brainstorm with you and come up with ideas. And but if you have all 3, then it's a lot easier for us to make a decision. It doesn't mean we're going to fund it, but yeah, there's like nice putting proposals through like a life cycle of finding all the information.
Dan, this is David. I'm sorry. I like that list of 3, and now I can't figure out what it was. Name of who you give money to, what they'll do, and what was the third, or did I miss it?
How much money?
Oh, and how much money? Okay.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised we get so many promising ones that just have 2 out of the 3, and then we just never hear back when we try to get the third one. Like,
Are you thinking that this group will also do legwork? And this is kind of back to the thing I was saying before. When people come in with this idea of like, we need to make X more secure, are you thinking that the Secure and Critical Projects group will start to source potential people to do the work and start getting quotes, or is that out of scope?
I wouldn't preclude it from scope. Like, I think the purpose of the group should be to do whatever we can to improve stuff. I think, yeah, getting quotes and running RFPs and stuff like that would make sense once we get more formalized.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like doing it in an RFP model.
Yeah, if you have the first idea of we want to do this, and you can formalize it enough to where somebody could actually write an RFP. I think if you come in so vague as like, we should improve this piece of software, I think it'd be hard for a firm or a person or anybody to write a proposal for that.
Yeah, fair enough.
This is David Wheeler. If I may, I'd like to add just some experiences from the CII, which tried to run something like that. There were some great proposals, but there was definitely a problem that you often got the people who were good at maybe making proposals as opposed to what was important. Things like NTP never, you know, that was clearly important, but it wasn't that they came to us. So unfortunately, some of the biggest, most important projects that really most need funding are run by people who are not going to write down proposals.
Yeah, trying to get more proactive about it if we could would be amazing.
Yeah, I wonder if the Let's Encrypt guys and the projects that they've been doing might have a good model for that, because I know they've been reaching out to different projects like directly, and just, but how they've identified them, I'm not sure. I don't know if somebody like mentioned it to them initially and then they kind of went from there, or if, you know, like I know that they're doing the curl rewrite, but that could be, I don't know if that was their own doing and the guy was like, yep, that sounds great, please, you know, fix my stuff, or if he approached them. But I know they've got bigger plans too of other projects they want to work on. It might be interesting to find out how they arrived at those.
Yeah, we chatted. Josh came and presented actually about this. I mean, that was one of the first questions I asked him. How did you pick these projects to start with? Were they your top choices? And he said, no, these were not our top choices. We had a list of like 10 we wanted to target, and these are the first ones that said, yes, we would do it. They think some of the other ones were just more skeptical. And by doing a couple first, like curl and Russell's and stuff like that, they'll show them how it works, get more people interested the next time they go around and come back and ask. But yeah, they've really tried to avoid hiring like random external people to go do stuff. It's really like, you're the maintainer of curl. Would you be interested in doing these improvements yourself, rather than kind of just showing up with random people who don't have any context on the project, which makes it harder, but it also makes it way more effective.
Yeah, exactly. I know they were approaching some folks in Linux, I think in the kernel and stuff too, and that's what they got a lot of pushback, and yeah, they switched over to more amenable projects. But
Linux one's coming. I don't think they got, they didn't get much pushback. That's still their big one for this year.
They did it. Yeah, that's a new development. I think they tried like 2-3 years ago initially, and then got told a very enthusiastic no.
Yeah, they're very excited about that one. I'm hoping to get that one rolled out soon.
Oh, that'd be cool.
So I haven't had an opportunity to make it to one of your meetings yet. You mentioned there's sort of 2 flavors of things that are going on, the package feed analysis and these funding discussions. In the meetings, do they sort of tend towards one or the other, or just kind of oscillates between them?
Yeah, if there is a presentation topic for the day, we start with that, and then the presenters always say it's going to be 20 or 30 minutes, and we'll have the second half for the other development topics, and then almost 100% of the time the discussion just gets going so well, and there's conversations and questions and everything like that, that we end up with like 5 minutes left at the end to go over development stuff, and then we usually end up handling that over Slack or email instead of the meeting. And that's what I meant by I feel pretty bad we never get time to discuss that stuff in these meetings. We should probably just set up a separate call for only that stuff and not the presentations.
Sorry, which stuff was that?
The like package feeds, package analysis, all the code and infrastructure stuff there.
I see. And then I guess in terms of the README, it looks like goals and non-goals aren't populated here.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I think I described it as the goal is to find that little thing in the comic, but yeah, I guess we never typed it in here.
And there's another to-do item on there.
And I guess around the goals and finding the little thing in the diagram, it might be useful to hear more about prioritization. So it sounds like right now it's very hard for us to even write checks. So this is a hard problem to imagine that we would have to allocate limited resources. I think right now we're on the opposite problem where it's like, please take our resources, which is a great problem to have, I guess. But we should also maybe think longer term about like once we have a more robust pipeline of stuff coming in, how this group and how this group will interact with the TAC and the governing board, and some of that's maybe like what we've been figuring out in the offsite. But in addition to that, like regardless of which actual group is handling it, how OpenSSF, regardless of which subgroup or whatever, will do prioritization of projects. So like, will we on a periodic basis set targets for things that we want to invest in and like rank them and allocate funding according to that? Is it going to be that we say, you know, we're going to do this many RFPs this year for this amount of money and anything left over can be allocated to something else? Is it going to be kind of first in, first out, where it's like, oh, we got a proposal, so let's write a check? I just wonder about a bit longer term, like once we're seeing more of these proposals and there's maybe more stuff that we want to fund than we can fund, how we want to rank those things and figure out what gets the money.
Yeah, I would love to be in that position.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just we did get a bunch of budget internally at Google. Like we asked for it, you know, 9 months ago now, I guess, and we got it for 2021. And the plan we came up with was break it down and try to aim to spend a fourth of it each quarter. So we don't spend it all on, you know, low quality stuff in January if we get it. And we're way behind. We're almost done with Q1. We have not gotten close to what we're supposed to spend. So got to ramp it up as we go.
And I guess to that point as well, thinking about when certain like corporate donations expire, like you have probably a deadline at Google by which you have to spend this money or you don't get it anymore. So if we also maybe had some kind of calendar around the availability of different like funds, and that part of the group that's like handling these proposals knows when there's funding that's about to expire that we better spend, and like maybe having an idea as to how we would deal with those scenarios as well, like not leaving money on the table essentially.
Yeah, there's probably some whole industry of people that work with big companies that have those calendars already, I would assume, knowing exactly when companies and budgets expire and stuff. Yes, I'm sure you probably have a good sense of it. Yeah, we're just on a normal, like ours is easy. We're on a normal calendar year. But yeah, I know other companies are on fiscal years that are offset and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess I mean, like, we don't need to track the world's tech spending, although that would be interesting. But what I mean more is like, okay, so let's say Google's giving X amount of dollars. We should know by when we must spend that number of dollars before it evaporates into thin air. So maybe just internally tracking like when these offers come in, what are the dates by which we have to have allocated the money, like decided who gets it, and what are the drop dead dates for when we have to have written the check, just because I know, at least in my past experience, and I'm sure everyone here as well, you get these budgets where if you don't spend them, they're just gone forever. And we want to, I guess it's just kind of like a logistical, not very interesting bureaucratic point that we should keep track of when we have to spend the money to still have access to it.
Yeah, that's a good one. And David was super helpful with us avoiding that in December of last year. Anything else here? Is the tooling one ready?
So I reached out to Ryan. He's very apologetic. He didn't realize that this meeting was today. So he said that he'd be available at the next one, which I guess is 2 weeks from today.
Oh, thanks, Dan.
That's good. Do we have election topics for today, or is that all wrapped up? I can't remember.
Yes, I was actually going to bring that up. So since we don't have the next group, though, I'm really interested in tooling because just to mention real quick, I think there's a lot of potential interaction between these two groups and tooling, at least for future. So I'd really like to. I know Dan, you're here every week anyway, so it's we can still have that conversation, but just kind of bootstrap it for the next meeting. I think it'd be interesting to think about how we can have a little bit more interplay between those working groups. But thank you so much for presenting today, Dan. That was definitely very, very helpful. I think officially these groups have met all the criteria that we've set out to move to the next phase. So I think we're good there. And then the only other thing that I had on the agenda, there was a lot of discussion around this in email over the past 2 weeks, but as we know, Maya stepped down from the governing board. She's actually resigned from GitHub and is moving on to something else. And so now we have this opening, and there was some discussion around, should we fill her seat now? Should we wait until the official elections that we've set out happen in August, or have some sort of interim thing? My interpretation, and people feel free to correct me, was that we were all cool with just go ahead and waiting, and that things are continuing on, and there's not a lot of need to go ahead and add disruption. So that was kind of my take on it. Do people have other opinions on that? Do they want to try to fill that official role now and not wait? What are thoughts there?
I think Dan had raised a good point in the email thread about not wanting to put someone in the role that wasn't like democratically elected. And I share that sentiment. I think that we can operate with one seat empty since the election is not too far away anyway. And that I personally would rather do that and then have that person voted in during the election, but I'm certainly open to other proposals.
I agree. I think I prefer waiting too.
Yeah, I agree as well. I don't, Dan, if you have I think in the email it seemed like you were okay with that as well too, but just for official reasons.
Yeah.
Okay. So officially we're good with waiting. I do want to say, I think that there is the potential for this to happen down the road as well. And so we should come up with a process of how we want to handle this in the future. And then we can document that and make it part of the official thing, but certainly it's not a high priority at the moment. So cool. Any other topics that folks want to discuss? Or we can go ahead and end about 10 minutes early today.
Have we decided how we're going to figure out and when we're going to figure out who stays on and whose seat is up for election later?
That is a really good question. No, we have not officially figured that out. The only thing that we've done so far is that we've split. We said we're going to have community seats and we're going to have governing board elected seats and what that election looks like. But we said that there would be a voluntary basis. And then if there were no volunteers, we would essentially randomly select people to be reelected. But I think it's still TBD. I kind of had this thought the other day that we didn't decide that in August, are we doing the community ones or are we doing the governing board seats first? So that's, I think, still open for discussion. Which also presents an interesting question of, since we're all bootstrapped right now, who exactly is considered a community seat versus a governing board seat? So we'll have to sort that out as well. We can certainly make this a topic for next week if folks want to sit and think about it for a little bit, or not next week, but next meeting. If you want to brainstorm a little before we have a full discussion.
It might be good to like hammer out what we intend to do and some dates for that sooner rather than later. Even if it's going to take us a while to actually do it, it would be good to know, like, by this date, we will have decided which seats are up. By this date, we will have decided whether it's community or governing board, or the third option, I guess, which is to have a couple of them be community and a couple of them governing board.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we should probably have a timeline on that. I'm trying to pull up the calendar here to look at. So our next meeting will be on the 6th of April. So we could bring it up for discussion then, we could kick it off in email after this meeting. People can discuss over email and Slack if we want, and then we can get through it, make it an official topic on the 6th. So we'll have one presentation for tooling, and then we could use the rest of the meeting to work through this. So I think it's reasonable to say that we can have this decided at the latest by the 20th, which is the following TAC meeting. We could at least decide what are the, like you said, which positions fall into which categories, and then that way we'll know what we're actually electing in August. Does that seem reasonable for everyone?
I think that seems good.
And Ryan has helpfully tagged all the issues with election process in the TAC repo. So,
Oh yes, I forgot I did that. Thank you. Cool. So we can go ahead and open up another issue as well, just to track that and keep that discussion going. So that seems to be a pretty effective way for this group to work through some of these issues.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Ryan, I didn't hear what process you're planning to use or what tool.
Oh, we have for the previous election stuff, we had created a GitHub issues. And
Okay.
we tagged them with the election process. So it's just an easy way to keep track of them as well.
So GitHub issues tagged with election.
Yeah, the tag is election process, like all one word.
Okay. I'm typing notes.
Always appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Any other topics folks want to chat about in the next 8 minutes? Going once, going twice. All right. We will conclude early today, I think, for maybe one of the first times ever. So, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dan, for the presentation. Definitely informative. So.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan.
See you guys later. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.